In this video, I'd like to go over some ideas for how you can really showcase your students' learning, their thought process, and really have them express themselves with their voice using these digital tools. This is a presentation that I've done in a number of different conferences, and it's really just a great springboard to just think about the tools that you may be familiar with already and really start to reflect on what are the best ways to incorporate them in my classroom. And really, when I think about technology and any kind of educational technology, it really is a way to have our students be able to express themselves, to be able to express their thoughts, their learning process, and a way to offer them a different choice of how they want to do that. That's really the most meaningful part of incorporating technology in the classroom. This presentation itself is one that you can find on bit.ly/hypeup projects or through this QR code, and it'll take you to access this presentation. And one of the reasons why you can access this presentation is as I go through it, I'll show a lot of different examples of some of the things that I discuss. And so with the presentation, you will be able to access these examples by just clicking on the images. Most of them are linked to these examples that you can kind of take a look at and might inspire you to tweak and use in your own classroom as you see fit. So one of the first things I want to talk about are a lot of our Google tools that we're familiar with. There's a lot of different ways that we can use these Google tools apart from their traditional nature, right? And Google Slides is one of the most versatile tools that Google has to offer. There's so many different ways that you can use slides as a part of just being presentations. So one of the things that I like to use with Google Slides are things called hyperslides, right? And it's a derivative of a hyperdoc. And a hyperdoc pretty much is a Google Doc, right, that has it's like a learning module. And I have more information on the hyperdoc in the additional resources page on our Tech Squad website. So if you want to learn more about hyperdocs, then take a look at the additional resources page and you'll find more resources on it. Now, I like to use slides because slides was a lot better in organizing the hyperdoc than using the Google Doc, but that's really just preference. So I would call them hyperslides. And they can be either a whole group that you do all together, or they can be student pace where you can assign hyperslides and the students work on their own hyperslides at their own pace. They can be teacher created where you create your own, or student created. Throughout the year, as my students became more familiar with hyperslides, they began, part of their projects was creating their own hyperslides, and they would share them with each other, with different groups that were responsible for teaching certain topics. There were times that we would do it with different grade levels. My 8th graders created hyperslides that were then given to the 6th graders and they had to complete it. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use that. So basically what a hyperslide is, it's a way for students to be able to critically think and problem solve as they learn about new topics. And it's a place where students have an opportunity of learning the information, of showing you what they have learned, and applying that information further as to connecting them to a wider audience. So it gives them this extension activity as well, besides just them reflecting on what they're learning. When I create the hyperslides, I like to be able to provide my students with an explore option, right? And this is where the students will build the background knowledge of the topic. So what is it that you're presenting? It could be either through videos that you've created screencasts or videos that you have found online, websites that they need to look at and read articles on. It could be images, anything that you're providing that's providing the background information. And once they have this background information, you need to be able to provide a way for students to explain then what they have just learned about or what they comprehend from that background information. So are you going to provide them with guiding questions to fill in directly on the hyperslides? I used to do that. I used to have a screencast that they would watch, and then on the following slide, I might have some text boxes that had some guiding questions based on those screencasts that students would then fill in. were they going to share their thinking digitally or live with their peers, right? It's also something they could work on together if they were working on it in a group and you wanted them to discuss the questions instead. So there's really a lot of different ways that the students could have then been able to explain what they're learning about. The interactive notebooks is one of the things that we used to use for students to be able to collaborate together. So this is one of the examples that I used to have with my students. They would work on this together. I would provide them with links here that would give them the background information. And based on that background information, then they would complete their digital interactive notebook. And as they did that, they did it together. They would go ahead and assign roles. They would discuss the topics together and figure out what they would write together on the response sheet. So it's just like the idea of the interactive notebooks that you would use live. You can also use digital ones that students could then actually work on together. And then finally, how are students going to now demonstrate what they've just learned, right? What are the students going to create, or how are they going to apply their work from everything that they've just talked about and all the knowledge that they just gained? Now looking at the bigger picture, how are they going to apply the work and how are they going to share it? So these are the three basic tenets of what hyperslides are: exploring, explaining, and then finally applying. The one example of the hyperslide is one that I created here for the Holocaust and genocide. So when we would discuss this unit, the students would then work on this hyperslide and they would talk about it together. And I'm just going to go through it very quickly. They'd have a video to watch. So these are their explaining questions that they would come up with. It would give them directions as to what they would have to do. They would then research things, and there was a chart that they would fill out. And these are some things that they would actually work on together. And at the very end, right, there was this reflection piece, which was part of their apply piece, where they would watch one final video and then they would have this Flipgrid response that they would have to then complete. So this basically is what a hyperslide would look like, right? It's a kind of self-contained module on some kind of topic that the students then would complete, and they could either complete together or individually. And eventually, as the students became accustomed to it, I put that on them. They then were responsible for creating their own hyperslides on a certain topic, and they would put it together. This is one of the ones that was created by my students. They were, their topic was nationalism in the era of good feeling. So it was their responsibility to go ahead and research the topic to figure out, what it is that they wanted to say about it. They put together the videos, the background information that the students would learn about. So they created their own screencast on the information. They created their own explain questions, right? They created even an Edpuzzle for it. They had their own apply activity at the very end, which they would call their special assignment, where they had to create a pictochart. So it's like an infographic based on the information that the students just learned about. So once the students knew the whole premise of the hyperslide, then they went ahead and this whole research was up to them. And this is something that they shared with other students. This is one of the ones that the 8th graders created for the 6th graders when they were learning about the same topics. So these are just some ideas of what we mean by hyperslides and what can be done in your classroom by using this concept. Something else with Google Slides, right? We talked about screencasts. Screencasts are great when you're creating a video to explain a topic. Google Slides is a great background when you're creating that screencast to be able to provide your information. And once again, these could be your own tutorials that you're creating for your students, or it could be the way for students to be explaining their thinking, their way of their presenting through screencasts rather than just live presentations. They would be able to create their own screencasts using Screencastify. There is a whole tutorial that I have for using Screencastify, so I'm not going to go through the whole how-tos right here, but it's something that's a Google Chrome extension and very easily just taps into your camera and microphone that's within your device already. So it's very simple to just one click and it automatically starts. And the great thing about Screencastify is that it saves to your Google Drive. On the additional resources page as well on our site, we do have this tutorial that'll take you to the Screencastify certification. So going through those modules and videos of Screencastify, it'll take you through the basics of how to do it, and it will earn you a badge that you have now become Screencastify certified. So you can find that link on our additional resources page, and that'll also let you go through those modules. If you're interested in learning more about Screencastify, if you haven't used it, you can go ahead and take a look at that resource. Something else that you can do with screencasting, right, is what we call app smashing. You can create other applications. Storyboard That is something that we have subscriptions to, and we also have tutorials on Storyboard That. Students can create timelines, they can create storyboards and other types of graphics, and then using Screencastify, they can present their storyboard and explain it as part of their presentation. So this is something that we call app smashing, right? You're taking a number of different apps and putting them together. So this is taking those digital tools to another level. Something else that you can do with Google Slides, you can create digital timelines, digital handbooks. They can be collaborative vocabulary sets. If you have vocabularies for chapters or units, have a slides presentation that you share within a number of students, and then together they create the vocabulary sets to study from. So here I have some examples of these vocabulary sets for our chapters. We would have vocab terms. The students would come together. You have like 4 students to a group, and they would work on this slide presentation together. They would divide the words up. And so they'd have the word, and then not only get the definition for, but also an image to help remind them what it was. And so this was what they would work on together at the beginning of chapters. And then this became a study guide, right, for them as they began to look back on the chapter. These were study guides that they created together. Also, these digital handbooks, one of their cross-curricular projects that they did was they created this Civil War handbook, and they researched the different topics of the Civil War that they were interested in and kind of created this book. Some of them focus on the causes of Civil War. Some of them looked at Civil War fashion or medicine or food. And they went ahead and did some research. They also made it interactive so that when people would look at the book, they would not only have the resources, but then they would also go ahead and have areas for people to type in notes and answers. So it became an interactive digital handbook for students to learn more about different parts of the Civil War. You have like drag and drop here for the timeline of where it needed to go. And these are all student created projects by using Google Slides. One other Google tool that I want to talk about is Google Drawing. Right? And Google Drawing is kind of, out of all of the different Google tools, the one that is least used, I think, but it really is very powerful and can be used across curriculums for a lot of different things. One of the things that it can be used for is what I used to call history snaps, and so I used to teach history, but it can be used for any kind of subject. Just as everything else can either be created by the teacher or by student creation as they're part of their projects. And it can be individual or it can be collaborative. So this link to this history snap is a student created history snap. And this is just an example of their students' history snap. We were studying the different colonies in the United States. And so the students had to create this kind of history snap. Let me provide here we go. The challenge for it, that they had to create a snap where they had to include a snap for each of these topics. The population in that colony, what was the economy like, what was the government like, and what was their view on slavery. And so they created a history snap for these 4 topics for each of the colonies, the southern colonies, the northern colonies, and the middle colonies. And then they put them all in a Google slide and try to create this scrapbook of the history snap is what they did. So the history snap itself is the Google Drawing where the student would then have a background image, right? And this is the picture of the text that they're snapping about, or the general topic. In this case, since it was the 13 colonies, they had a picture of the map there just highlighting the 13 colonies. Then you have a text, and the text has to be something very short. So it's no more than a sentence or two. That's either a direct quote if it's happening from like a novel, because you could also use this as a book snap, or it's a main idea of the important detail of the snap itself. So since one of them would have been about population, it would have then been talked about what the population was like, or about slavery is. So this is one of the southern colonies. So this is going to be slavery, outnumbered slaveholders in the South, right? And so this is part of the view of what slavery was like in the southern colonies. And then you have an image that represents the meaning of the text. And that in itself creates what the history snap is. Now, from creating the history snap is very easily just using Google Drawing. You'll be able to then paste images from the web. You can then be able to bring in a text box to put that on top to put in the snap, and then they can insert their image. And then once it's done, they can download their snap as an image, either a JPEG or a PNG, and then that snap can be put into a Google Slide, as in the scrapbook, or anything else that you want to put it in. Something else that you can do with Google Drawing are create interactive posters. If you've ever heard of ThingLink, right? That is a site that allows you to create these kind of interactive posters. You can do the same thing with Google Drawing. You can put a background image and then create these little icons, right? Whether they're numbers, or if you want to create any other types of icons that then the person can click on, and it'll link them to something else, whether it's a video, whether it's a separate site. And so now this image, when I share it, right, it becomes now an interactive image where it's more than just a picture that I've created here, but now it actually tells a story. And so this particular image is informing it about the War of 1812. So here we have different videos that you can click on. That talks more about the War of 1812. So there's different things that you can do. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about interactive posters, you can click on the link here and it'll take you to some more additional information about interactive posters and how to create them in Google Drawing. Something else you can use with Google Drawings are creating class memes. And this is also something that works across curriculums, whether it's teacher created or student created. It can be used to explain vocabulary terms. It can be used to explain different types of topics or concepts, but it's a fun kind of interactive way for incorporating Google Drawing in the classroom as well. Some other ideas for Google Drawing can be using it to create different types of graphic organizers. The students can create book jackets or movie posters. So it really is quite a versatile tool that can be used for students to be able to express their learning and express their thinking. One of the most important things about student voice and choice is the fact that there needs to be a way for students to be able to present these ideas. They're creating these projects, so there has to be a way for students to be able to have an audience to actually hear their voice, whether it's within the classroom with their other classmates, or if you're sharing it across classrooms, across grade levels, or perhaps even with neighboring schools. But there should be some kind of way for the students to be able to not only curate their work, but also to be able to express and communicate their ideas with one another and provide feedback. So different ways that you can do this. Of course, Padlet is one of the best ways for students. It's very easy to post everything that they've created, whether it's through different types of presentations or images or videos, but it's very easy to post all these things on a Padlet and students can view it and be able to provide feedback. Another way is a Wakelet, and Wakelet is very similar into creating a different type of curation. And here you can create Wakelets for specific topics or projects and have students upload their images or files and videos. It can create a whole class library of projects. So now you've got a portfolio of all of your students' projects. I've linked here the hyperlink that'll take you to Wakelet if you want to learn a little bit more about it. Of course, also Flipgrid is a great way for students to be able to express their discussions and ideas in class. You could have a class discussion or a class debate through Flipgrid. Students can have an event or a concept that they have to explain, and they'll teach it to the class. So you have this grid full of different types of concepts that they're teaching one another. Instead of live presentations, students can go ahead and make their presentations on Flipgrid, and they can link their project to the grid itself. You could have counterfactuals, what if events, and then students can then go ahead and explain the impact that the event would have. So these are just different types of ideas of what you can use Flipgrid for itself. One of the things that I used it for when I taught history was for history labs, where they would work using primary sources in class. And from that primary source, there would be one essential question that, using the information from the primary source, then they would answer that essential question on the Flipgrid. And so all of these things are ways that you can go ahead and incorporate these types of digital tools in your class, and really primarily focusing on how can the students really use these tools, not only just us using it in class, but giving these tools the ability for students to be able to use them, to be able to really express their understanding, to express their voice. And that's really the main purpose of these digital tools in the classroom. So thank you for watching, and I hope this kind of helped you reflect on digital tools and different ways that you can use it in your own class.